Greetings, welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today I'm going to explore the Pisces Lunar Eclipse, which occurs across the 7th or the 8th of September, depending on location. I'll share the exact timings for the major cities shortly. Now, a Pisces lunar eclipse can be very sensitive. It can be very much about the psychological, spiritual and emotional dimension, but this one has the North Node, the point of destiny, right beside it. But also the depositor of the sign of Pisces, Jupiter, the traditional ruler of the sign, is very, very supportive in its exaltation in the sign of Cancer. But we need to be conscious of the exact moment this event occurs based on Greenwich, Universal Time and the Prime Meridian. That means the moon, in terms of the nativity, is in the first house. Very much about our identity. But of course we've got the stern Saturn has inversed back into Pisces, where he's going to be through to the middle of February next year for his final pass in his total 29.5-year journey around the sky. So that puts also an extra, if you like, gravitas on this particular event. Now, on the other side of the heavens, of course, we have the sun in the practical, precise sign of Virgo, but also the ruler of that sign is domiciled there too. So that's intriguing. So the lunar eclipse provides a backdrop for the next 6 months. To navigate this, you can download your free Lunar Eclipse Survival Guide by clicking on the link beneath this video. But I want to go through with you how this will play out based on a bigger picture than just thinking about eclipses per se. For example, we need to look back to the first in the season of this pairing, this polar pairing, which occurred last year on the 18th of September in the sign of Pisces, but was conjunct the other ruler of the sign, dreamy, drifting, but also mystical energies of Neptune. And that may have created some disorientation, a sense that some things were being washed away. I think for all of us, as Saturn and Neptune have aligned in Aries, giving us that first blush of what it's going to be like through the new era that we're going into, when they come back together on the 18th of February next year in the exact conjunction. Energy has been low, particularly psychological, but also physical vitality too. So the fact that Saturn has moved back into Pisces, we have this reverse or mirror eclipse from what occurred last year, is going to be particularly intriguing. So I'm going to share with you the event chart from a natal viewpoint, but also a solar perspective, so we can all relate to the overall zodiac collectively, and that gives us some extra intel of how to guide our moves over the next 6 months. I'm also going to share with you the exact degree of the people that I feel will be affected most by this, and also I'm going to share with you about the fixed star Archimedes, which is very, very close to this event and actually can be extremely positive. It has the flavour of Venus and Jupiter. So I think some good things can come from this lunar eclipse, but as ever, the potential for things to be highly charged, and we have a battle between the practical, physical world of Virgo, where the South Node is. The South Node can see us rather addicted to our routines, to being very precise, to making sure that everything's neat and tidy, and in a way blocking off the potential to grow in terms of that spiritual dimension? Or do we get so washed away that we find it difficult to maintain our duties and obligations? That could be the little bit of a push and pull that we're all going to experience over the next half year. I'm then going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect for yours based on your ascendant, sun or the moon. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. A very warm welcome. If you're new to my channel, please feel welcome to share any thoughts. It's very much a community. If you've yet to subscribe, please continue to help the channel to thrive by doing so now. If you would like to work with me one-to-one, please see the testimonials below, but you can also see the latest ones just coming up on the screen. And also check out my new website at patrickarundell.com. We're refining it all the time. It's getting better, I feel. Thank you for your patience with us. You can enjoy your free daily, weekly, monthly, general horoscopes, yearlies too, but also your love and Vedic forecast as well, and my incredible 3 card tarot. It's absolutely brilliant. You can also download your free natal chart. And one of the things I would say about the nodes being in this particular equation so acutely, if you would like to understand about draconic astrology, very much to do with the soul, very much to do with what we bring into this world karmically, and that can change a natal chart quite a bit, particularly if you don't have the North Node in the sign of Aries and don't have it pretty close to 0 degrees. And that draconic analysis can be absolutely profoundly enriching and enlightening for a lot of people. For example, Madonna always works with her draconic, which gives her the sun in Aquarius, but based on natal, it's in Leo. So if you'd like to know more about draconic and enjoy my special offer where you can get your draconic forecast for year 2026, but also get the rest of this year free, plus your Draconic Life Roadmap Report, 30% off, totally unique to you, please see beneath this video. So this event occurs at 6:12 p.m. Universal, but on the screen I'm sharing the exact timings and locations of those major cities. You'll see it is just Sydney that goes into the 8th of September on this particular occasion. But let's think about eclipses. Yes, they're part of our cultural awareness that something big is playing out. Let's think about the sign of Pisces. It's the sign of culmination because it's the final zodiac sign. Yes, it's a water sign, so emotional, but its traditional ruler Jupiter is very much about faith, I feel. But the modern ruler Neptune, very much that aquatic energy that fits the sign. So it can be a shimmering energy. It can be an opportunity to really be very compassionate, very giving, very sacrificing. It can be also where we can let go of resisting. And that's an interesting thing with the opposition to the sun and broadly Mercury in the opposite sign, which are really asking us to keep a grip on reality, the details, making sure that we keep all those routines together. But if we're denying how we feel, our senses, and we're not listening to our hunches, the chances are things could get rather tricky. Now let's just think about that fixed star of Archana. So Archana is the hottest and bluest of the 10 brightest stars in the sky, and it has that Jupiter-Venus energy that I mentioned, said to have a great disposition and a very philosophical vibe, which very Jupiterian if you think about it, and can be good for anything to do with ecclesiastical achievement, but also legal affairs too, and very, very positive if you have been working on something in a very honourable and dignified way. Some good news could come for you over the next couple of years, particularly if you are involved in publishing or writing, but anything to do with healing, nurture, kindness, all of these things can be very, very helpful over this next half year. But if you're someone with a great appreciation of the arts, of music, of photography, of film, your imagination could be lit up by this lunar eclipse if you can get that balance, because that's what eclipses are about. Those polar sets are about, in a way, getting to the midpoint of the two extreme energies. So the people who will be influenced by this most of all is anyone from 13 degrees through to 17 degrees in the aforementioned Pisces, Virgo, but also in Gemini and Sagittarius. So the mutable signs. And one of the things about mutability is the need to be flexible, but sometimes we can flex so much we don't actually try to get to a position which is a little bit more fixed and deal with the issue at hand. But if you have got planetary influences across those degrees, 13 degrees to 17, in any of the mutable signs, I do feel that you're going to feel this event more keenly. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart from a natal perspective. I don't share Greenwich because I'm in the UK. Greenwich isn't the same as London. There is an hour difference. It's based on universal time, and the ascendant, you can see, is just slightly under 7 degrees in the sign of Pisces. So pretty close to the moon. And therefore, this event gives the moon extra power, or pushes the moon to be in touch with the need for emotional identity. And with the North Node there as well, the point of destiny, that's an encouragement to be welcome. But look at that depositor of Jupiter, because it's in the 5th house, which is where we can take the 1st house energy of beginning something and having the confidence to visualize our individuality. But the 5th house is where it may actually manifest itself. So it could become richly shown over the next 6 months. So if you are someone with a lot to share and a lot to offer when it comes to imagination, and invest in your talents in a way that is very creative and meaningful, some good fortune can come from this event. But of course, what we do need to do with the Sun, but also Mercury in that 7th house, along with the feisty Mars, is make sure that we're staying in touch with others, that we're understanding that however much the creative process can be about what we want to do as individuals, the way it reaches out and is received by others is a critical part of the process. You often find with people who are very, very creative that they're not so conscious of other people because they're so invested in what they need to do. And I must say, you know, if you are someone who's very talented, you have to have that level of commitment, faith, self-belief, and perhaps absorption in order to get things over the finishing line. But even so, even the most talented of people, if they make connections to others, where those connections in this case with Virgo are pragmatic, reliable, ordered, efficient, then that actually is going to be a channel for that creativity in a much more productive way, because Earth signs, Virgo, is very much about what we can achieve that's tangible and lasting. So I feel that Jupiter energy, and obviously Jupiter is in a sextile with the Sun, one of astrology's finest, most buoyant influences, plus the trine with the position of the Moon and also the North Node. So I feel that this particular lunar eclipse has lots of blessings in it, but it won't be blessings that won't come from us working at it. Now, I mentioned in my preamble about the North Node, the South Node. I feel the South Node in Virgo could be where we're a little bit too attached to things that just seem quite important to us in terms of keeping our life very ordered, but in some ways that can be a crusher of passion. So if we're letting our love of routine pulverize our talents, that's not going to be a good thing. So it's all about a balance. It's all about trying to find that midpoint. But on this particular occasion, Jupiter really is such an ace help to the process. And because it's linking back to the North Node, and the North Node obviously is a clockwise influence, is going to come to the end of this journey at the end of July, in terms of the true node in 2026, when it will invert back into the sign of Aquarius. Guess what? We have a solar eclipse on the 17th of February, the first of a new series that's coming soon after this one. Of course, we do have the solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo on the 21st of this month, and I will do a special on that for you too. But we do have a movement all the time, and that energy of Pisces does suggest that if we've really worked at something and been in touch with our instincts, had the courage to be brave, about helping people, shown sacrifice, but also shown self-care, because it's important not to overgive. A lot of people who work in health and care industries have Pisces or Virgo energy, but it's about getting the right balance. So Jupiter here means that we can bring some good humour, some faith, some kindness to the whole process. But the dragon's head and the dragon's tail, the dragon's head is saying, yes, be in touch with our individuality. The dragon's tail is saying, where are we too attached to things that we've been comfortable with in the past? Do we have the courage to embrace the North Node, which is really to go for what our most positive outcome could be? And that's really what this particular lunar eclipse is priming up for us. Now I'm going to share with you now the solar event chart. The reason I do this is that the Zodiac is based beginning with Aries. It's a story, a procession of the animals. And of course, in terms of Western tropical astrology, the constellations above are purely there for an illustrative viewpoint. So essentially, we have 4 quadrants each year, which begin with the vernal equinox in cardinal quadrant 1. So looking at the illustration in that sense, the other ruler of the sign of Pisces, Neptune, is in a continually very strong link with Pluto and also with Uranus. And what we've had since Saturn and Neptune went into Aries, we've had a very much more abrasive, aggressive attitude, particularly to people who perhaps are less fortunate. And I think that what we're going to see now is some pushback about some of the dismantling of services or the philosophies that have driven that. That more masculine approach hasn't always been for the best. In other ways, perhaps society has become a little bit too dependent on the state, and it is about finding a balance, because we should all take responsibility for ourselves. That's very much that Virgo energy. But it is also important to understand that some people don't get much choice on where they're born, what their surroundings are, what type of parenting they get, the type of food or not that they get. And so if we're very caught up in that practical material world, very much the earth energy, and not in tune with how it might be for those who find it more challenging, it's all about finding a balance. But of course, personal responsibility, absolutely vital too. But you can see it does put the moon and the North Node in house 12. So if you are someone who tends to be maybe a little bit triggered by anything to do with your shadow side, or anything to do with fears and anxieties, or your past is not yet quite released in the way it could be, which is true for most of us. I feel we have to keep working at it. We're kind of encouraged not to be too caught up in perfectionism or too critical of those who might actually have those challenges, because we all have those challenges. It's just that life events can bring them to the surface, and you know, if we're lucky enough to glide through life without experience too many roadblocks, great. But for many people, life isn't that easy. So I feel that this zodiacal illustration just reminds us of the need to work on those polarities. So please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. So Aries, this lunar eclipse over the next 6 months suggests that if you're into healing, personal development, reflection, retreats, any of those things, this is an ideal opportunity to really give yourself the chance to enjoy and engage with those things. But if you're someone who has been trying very hard to manifest something in the here and now, something that's very much to do with your identity, that's how you could be seen as being very capable, thrusting, assertive, maybe that's come from the solar eclipse earlier in your sign in March, Neptune and Saturn then moving into Aries have provided some opportunities, perhaps also some challenges. But on this particular event, your ruler Mars is in a right angle with Jupiter. And you know, it's a lunar eclipse which does nudge all of us collectively, but particularly your sign, to grapple with our vulnerabilities. with the shadow side of our natures, the things that we may find more challenging, where we feel more sensitive, where we feel more exposed. And if you let your normal approach, which can be very assertive, dominate this opportunity, it could be an opportunity missed. Because if we think with Saturn also in your 12th solar house, right through these next 5.5, 6 months, it's a chance to release things from your past, perhaps go back and reflect deeply on things that were difficult or painful, because once you really confront them and face them and let them go, it's going to create so much extra energy in the here and now. But getting that balance between the physical, practical side of your life, the Virgo energy, and also that more feeling, ephemeral, the psychological energy, the lunar eclipse, is what this next 6 months is going to be about. And as I say, Mars is in that very strong right angle with Jupiter. Ironic, with Jupiter, the depositor of the sign of Pisces, forging a fabulous link to the Sun and also the eclipse and the North Node. And that, in a way, is another nudge to have faith in the emotional process. But Mars in your 7th house could see you tempted to be competitive, feisty, wanting people to really comply to your view of situations, and that I feel could be a little bit of a mistake. So with all of us, we obviously need to know where we need to keep our boundaries very firmly in place. But if there have been some painful breakups in your past, or losses, or events that were unpleasant, and they're still resonating deep within you, they could also be having an impact on how you're relating to others now. So the more you can bring those vulnerabilities into you and become more holistic in your approach to your health, physical or emotional, the better you can thrive in the months ahead. So Taurus, the moon is exalted in your sign, and you have therefore a real appreciation of the value that she brings. Very much to do with security. Your sign, ruled by Venus, also gives you an appreciation of your self-worth, everyday money, and just feeling that your life foundations are stable. But Venus, your ruler on this event, is actually in a challenging angle to the position of the lunar eclipse. It's in a quincunx. And the eclipse for you is in the part of your chart to do with your network, your connections, your long-term hopes. Can be to do with the more idealistic part of your situation. Could be to do with where you want to be lucky. But on the opposite side of the heavens, the cluster of players in Virgo is pushing you to manifest your individual talents and creativity. And if there are certain alliances that you've got, perhaps connections to others, that don't necessarily feed your soul or encourage you to express those talents, or there could be a little jealousy, or someone in some ways, their energy just doesn't quite make you feel comfortable, that could show up over the next 6 months, particularly with Saturn in your 11th house. And it may be that certain friendships are going to change. It could be where you live is going to change. But you need to find that tip point between being uniquely you, the energy of Virgo, the 5th house, but also connecting to others in a way which works. So they are nourishing relationships, they are supportive relationships, they're interactive. And the energy of Venus is quite delicate on this event, and therefore do be mindful of that security and more safety first nature that is right at the root of your being. So Gemini, your quick wits, versatility and flexibility are much to do with your ruler Mercury. But Mercury on this event is occupying the second of its 2 homes in the sign of Virgo, so broadly opposite the position of the eclipse. And that eclipse is also seeing Saturn back in the sign of Pisces now. So over the next 6 months, there is a bit of a challenge for you who can use your sense of humour, your ability to move the moment, to pivot quickly, and that's very, very good at some levels. But the cluster of energy in the sign of Virgo is much to do with your emotions. It's much to do with security. If you're doing something for your work, for example, that's very heavy going and creates a lot of strain, or you have a lot of responsibility and you're not really enjoying it, I feel that's going to show up quite strongly. If on the other hand you do want more recognition, you want to raise your profile, you love being in the limelight, you actually feel very comfortable with that, all you're being asked to do is make sure that you're inclusive of how things feel, not just work in the more practical dimension of achievement, which comes from that 10th house energy, and having Saturn, which is very redolent of those goals and ambitions, in the same sign as Pisces and relatively close to the position of the eclipse. Now what you do have is Jupiter, the planet of fortune, in your second solar house, in a great link with the Sun, and also a very encouraging one with the position of the lunation and the North Node. If you're wanting to do anything around the property matter, you could actually make it move forwards at pace. And there may be something that just falls into place, which has a level of true serendipity about it. Cancer, how things feel, atmospheres, the environment you exist in, is central to who you are. But this is a lunar eclipse, as will be the solar eclipse on the 21st, which is going to push you to engage, to discuss, converse. It may be about contracts, it may be about travel, it may be about philosophies. You could consider writing something. If you have your own business and it has a presence in terms of the digital sphere, you may work hard on that with the energy that this particular event creates. Because Jupiter, exalted in your sign, is actually a real asset to you. And if you're wanting to share your ideas or go to places which enrich you emotionally, spiritually, and also perhaps in terms of, enjoying the local culture, historic environment, and immersing yourself in that, because of course the sign of Pisces is very lovely for anything to do with water, that would be a great way to use this energy. But what you might find is that your philosophy and at times your idealism could be challenged, unfortunately, by someone you encounter who has a different worldview, and that could be a bit tricky at times over this next half year. So you need to make sure that whatever it is that you want to manifest, just be conscious of what other people may expect from you. So Leo, the lunar eclipse is in the part of your situation which is more subterranean. It's not so obvious. The moon is obviously about emotion. It's very close to the North Node. So the North Node in the 8th house can be about what we want to achieve materially. We want to improve our situation, bring more money in, feel more secure. So it can be about long-term planning around things like pension, savings, shares, and so on. But the 8th house can also be where we're most invested spiritually, psychologically, and intimately. Now on the other side of the heavens, we have the neat pragmatism of the sign of Virgo. And that also has Mercury back at home. So that's very much about your everyday realities. That can be about money, but it can be about your values, your foundations. But of course, Virgo can be quite sharp and precise, whereas the sign of Pisces can be very mystic, not necessarily easy to get a hold of. And also Jupiter, the ruler traditionally of Pisces, is in a part of your chart that's very also deep, the 12th house. So the instinctive side of life around whether it's money, whether it's around business, whether it's around relationships, the instinctive side of things gets an opportunity, but that may push you to step outside your comfort zone with what your practical everyday reality is. But if something is out of kilter, there's too much give and not enough get, or you're putting loads of effort into your own business, for example, and you just don't think it's giving you the return, that's something you may carefully consider over this next half year. But also be conscious with Saturn back in Pisces, that can be quite a cool, steely influence and inverts back to 25 degrees. I think the inference of that, to be honest, means that if you are in a situation where you don't feel your devotion and sincerity is being matched, it could end up feeling quite an empty experience through the back end of this year. Now, Venus is in your sign at the moment, giving you a sense of glamour, extra glamour, but it is in a sharp angle with the position of the moon. What I feel it's important to do on this event, however much we would like life to be as we see it or imagine it, I do feel that you need to be prepared to dive deep, and that may mean probing and getting more in touch with the psychological dimension, because that will help you to understand that more practical dimension in a much more constructive way. What I would say is that Jupiter, the ruler of Pisces, is in a square with Mars on this event, and Mars is in your third house. It wouldn't be a complete surprise if something came up over the next 6 months that's not been completely obvious, and that may be a deeper knowledge, a deeper understanding of how you can go forwards, but it still may require you to receive some information that for a proud sign like you could be a little bit challenging. So the moon in the 8th house can be a little bit testing. It can make us feel somewhat vulnerable at times, but if you're open to understanding where you should be giving maximum investment or where you should be toggling back to protecting your everyday needs, I feel that you can work with this event well. So Virgo, for you, this event occurs in your opposite sign. So clearly it could be around relationships that issues come up. The Sun, but also Mercury in your sign, are pushing you to stay with what feels right for you, to focus on the things that excite you, to be single-minded. On the other side of the heavens are going to be the people echoing back to you how they view what you're doing. Now, if you're in situations where people are very supportive to your industry and individuality, that might not necessarily be a problem. But if someone feels a bit left out, a bit neglected, unseen because you're so busy, that could cause some issues around a relationship matter over the next 6 months. And we have to be real with Saturn back in your 7th house. You're either going to bake in a relationship, or one could come in that's very serious, or it could be one that's not working. And it would need to be one that's really bumping along the bottom. I feel no one's going to leave your world who's truly right for you. But Saturn in that 7th house can be a little bit testing. So I feel that this particular lunar eclipse can amplify a need to be more understanding of the give and take around all sorts of relationships. I often think when we think about relationships, we think about what we need and what we're prepared to give. How often, if we're really honest, do we truly think about what the other person needs from us? And I think that's the message of this lunation for your sign. So Libra, your sign is very much about the mind because it's an air sign. You're evaluating, trying to find balance. In a way, it makes you an ideal candidate to deal with the polarities of eclipses, because you're able, I feel better than most, to weigh up the relative benefits. Now, the Sun and Mercury in your 12th house are asking you to be mindful of how you can be productive but also be sensitive to your inner world. The Moon, and particularly the Node and Saturn in your 6th house, are reminding you where you need to be virtuous about your health, but don't see it as just your physical health. It's not necessarily just about going pounding the pavement. It's also the other things that we can do. For example, what we eat and drink, the times that we eat and drink. You know, I'm terrible for having late night snacks, and obviously that's not great for us, but it's something I find very hard not to do. So if I wanted to clean up my act over the next 6 months, being a Libra ascendant, I would use the discipline of Saturn to try to moderate very 6th house and refine my approach, but I need to do it in a way which is mindful of the emotional reasons. So one of the things with the 6th house is it can be a bit perfectionist. So what we don't want to do is beat ourselves up because something isn't quite perfect. So for example, if you would like to lose a little bit of weight, you'd like to give up a vice, do it in stages. Don't feel that you have to get there in one giant step, because that energy in the sign of Virgo could eat away at the process in not a particularly helpful manner. The other thing I'd say with this lunation If you do work too hard, you don't get particular recognition, maybe not a particularly supportive environment. There is criticism, there is backbiting, office politics. Not every place has that stuff. They might have a bit, but some places are absolutely rife with it. If you're a particularly sensitive person and you are in an environment like that, I feel that Mars being in your sign on this event and in a square with Jupiter could give you the push to take that step forwards, to try out your options outside of something that doesn't feel that it's feeding your soul. So very important to be aware of the practical but also the atmospheric parts of your health and your routines, but also your obligations. But Mars is there as your ally, giving you that push that if you do need to break free from something, do consider it. So Scorpio, the 5th house lunar eclipse is an opportunity to think about whether your friendships or social interactions at the moment are actually giving you the opportunity to feel joyful about life. There may be some really solid citizens in your world that you're not going to fall out with, but if you're spending time where the energetic exchange isn't particularly stimulating, I feel this lunar eclipse asks you to think very carefully about the new interest you could take up. Whatever it may be, whether it's joining a book club, whether it's starting to play a sport, whether it's doing some yoga, perhaps potting, whatever it may be, everyone's uniquely different, but generating some new interest and connections that can feed into your long-term situation, I think actually could be very good for your soul. But of course Saturn's in your 5th house now, so you may have to overcome an inner resistance if it means going out on a windy, dark night to meet up with people, when it's more comforting and appealing to stay by the fire. But somehow or another, these next 6 months, particularly with the industry of Saturn, are pushing you to redefine your future plan, but redefine your future plan in a way that feels really right. And you know, the same can be true of a romantic situation. If you're involved with someone and it's not quite working for you, with Mars, your traditional ruler, locked into your 12th, Pluto, your modern, into your 4th houses, they're very psychological. So something could come up, especially with Mars in a square with Jupiter. I feel that if something isn't working, you could have a desire to actually break free, liberate yourself, even if it's not necessarily an unpleasant or an unkind relationship. But if you don't just feel that sense of possibility for pleasure and joy, that's the big existential question that I feel this lunar eclipse is asking you to grapple with. So Sagittarius, the fascinating thing about this particular lunar eclipse is that your ruler Jupiter feeds into it in a very positive way, but also a potentially challenging way. The positive way is that Jupiter's in a part of your chart to do with understanding a more subterranean part of life. It's hosted by Cancer, so that's feelings. And Jupiter's rulership of Pisces, unlike your sign where it's happy-go-lucky, very much to do with pushing you outside your comfort zone, being daring, very positive, and of course can be about luck. Its rulership of the sign of Pisces is much more to do with the spiritual dimension. And that brings us to where the moon is for you, because it's in your 4th house. The 4th house is how we feel things. It's very redolent of the energy of Cancer, where Jupiter is, and Jupiter links to this event. So that's lovely. So we have your mutual receptivity, but also Jupiter is the depositor of this event. So that's very, very positive. So I feel that if you were considering moving, so there was a transaction or a negotiation, Jupiter could bring some fortune to the event. Jupiter also links back really brilliantly to the Sun, suggesting if you are ambitious and you want to take a giant step forwards towards a major goal, Jupiter could see you very savvy and skilled in terms of the negotiation. But that moon and node in the 4th house is very powerful about how you feel, the atmosphere of your environment, where you live, your relationships to your family, but most of all, Sagittarius, your relationship to yourself. Because over the last couple of years, since Saturn has been in Pisces, and since 2012, when Neptune returned back to Pisces from Aquarius after its first visit, I don't feel that the emotional part of your situation has been entirely easy. And Saturn back into Pisces through to the middle of February next year, together with this eclipse, is really prizing open a door of opportunity. But it's a door of opportunity that asks you to pause and perhaps step back from those worldly drives and ambitions, and just to make sure that things just feel right. Because if you're doing things, pursuing things in order to achieve success, but you're not enjoying it, or it's with people you don't like, or with a business that doesn't share your values, I feel the moon, and particularly Saturn, are going to show up that discomfiture over the next half year. But the other part of Jupiter is that Jupiter is in a square with Mars. Mars is in a very good location for you at the moment, your 11th house of friendship. If there is a situation where somehow or another there's a friendship or a connection where you feel somewhat discombobulated, maybe someone's stifling that part of you that needs to be a free spirit, I think Mars in a way is asking you to be more assertive about going for what you want in the spiritual dimension for the long term. The 11th house is more about hopes. It's not just about the practical part of the 10th house, success. So just be aware that things need to feel right. You need to be comfortable with whatever you're doing. Set some pauses. Give yourself this space to just be in touch with your emotions. That's so important, especially if you're aiming high, because you need to make sure your inner support structures, but also your practical support structures around you, can help you to get to where you want to be. So Capricorn, I feel you're going to have some very important discussions over the next 6 months. You may even find yourself traveling. If it's traveling with a purpose, so to do with work, wouldn't be a complete surprise. Or if it was a job that meant you did move around, or it was to do with sales or marketing or technology, all of those things can be rewarded by your core asset of productivity. Your hard work is something that can come back to you, but there will be a need to engage with others. And the moon in the third house does carry a little bit of a warning, because third house moons can be somewhat mercurial. So there can be a tendency to talk things through quickly, but not necessarily feel the moon. Now, because it's Pisces, that will help to moderate that to some degree. The node is there as well. I feel over the last couple of years, with Saturn, your ruler, being in your third house, you've probably done a lot of thinking about your belief systems, the ideas you have, the people you're connected to in your community. There may have been some chaffing, there may have been some tensions, perhaps even with siblings. The position of the Sun and Mercury on the other side of the heavens, in a way, could prime you to break free of anything that's very limiting. So maybe if you're working in an environment where your ideas are resisted, that could be something that you find tough. And also, if you live somewhere and you're surrounded by people, the third house is the everyday world, who aren't so good, you find it, isn't very interesting or varied, that's something else you could consider. And because Mars, the planet of desire, is in a very prominent part of your chart, and in a square with Jupiter, the planet of fortune, in your 7th house, if there is someone you're drawn towards who does have similar ideas, or an ideology that you respect, you could find yourself pursuing that opportunity with a lot of enthusiasm, and it could just work out extremely well for you. But just know, with Saturn, your ruler, back in the third house, choosing your words carefully will be important. So it's key to be in touch with how we feel with the words, but also take a little time to just say how you feel if you're discussing anything delicate or important, but particularly around a contractual or publishing matter. So Aquarius, this is a lunar eclipse in the 2nd house, everyday money, also how we feel about our value, our worth, our life foundations. But it is blessed by Jupiter, the traditional ruler of Pisces, in a very productive part of your situation, and that too is linking back brilliantly to the Sun. So if you find yourself discussing a key financial matter over this next half year, it really wouldn't be a surprise. It could be life-changing. It may be to do with investments, pensions, shares, legacies, inheritances. It may be to do with trying to reset your world in perhaps a way that just feels a little easier for you. It could be about where you're closely connected to others, like a business relationship, or of course it could be around a more intimate tie. Having Saturn, your traditional ruler, back in your second house for 1 5.5 month final push just means that the work you've been doing over the last couple of years, perhaps resetting your posture, there may have been some income streams that have changed, that are no longer producing in the way they once did. Or maybe you've been checking out your value, or you've been learning new skills, you've been trying to get thriftier, more pragmatic in your approach to resources. If you're doing all those things, that's great. Continue to do it. It is about finding a balance. It is about getting the midpoint between those two polarities, which comes from the energy of Virgo. And that can be about where you're most closely invested, but the moon energy suggests that those connections need to feel right, because I sense that the frequency of how you receive information or who you connect with is going to be heightened in quite an exquisite way over this next half year. So Pisces, I feel that this eclipse is very much about relationships. And because the moon's in your sign along with the node, and they're being blessed beautifully by Jupiter in your 5th house, that's kind of saying in any kind of relationship, you really have to feel part of it. If it seems that someone else is dominating and the energy between you isn't aligned in a particularly fair way, it is out of kilter, that's something you may want to assess. And Saturn being back in your sign suggests that your physical vitality may be a little bit lower. If there are connections you have that are a bit draining or not very encouraging, the energetic exchange isn't very good, then do think seriously about where you can take what you've got to offer to somewhere else. But if you are in a romantic relationship that's going well, that Jupiter link to the moon and the node is delightful. And you know, if it is one that's developing and emerging and stepping forwards, I think what Saturn says to you is just don't rush the process. But the vibes look pretty good for a lunar eclipse. We know lunar eclipse can create tension, but if you're in a time where you do feel that balance between you, the individual, and your connection with the others is pretty good, even if it's not perfect, then keep going with going. If you're unsure, it's where you don't feel that the line between what you give and get is particularly equal. It's not very responsive in the way you need. You could think very, very carefully about a current job, a current friendship, a current romantic relationship.